Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Andrew Gaffney. I'm with Demand Gen Report. Really glad you could join us today. We recently wrapped up our 8th annual Demand Gen benchmark study, and once again, ABM proved to be the top initiative and priority for the B2B marketers we polled. So we're really happy to kick off our first webinar of the year with this session, which is going to be address ABM learnings and best practices. Looking forward to today's session. We're actually going to be hearing from Jon Miller. Jon is the CEO and founder of Engagio. And Jon's going to be sharing their latest new and clear, some insights from the new and clear and complete guide to account-based marketing. Some quick housekeeping before we get started. We want to try to make this as interactive and conversational as possible. We encourage everyone to share any of the findings and things that we'll be discussing out on the social sphere. We'll be monitoring LinkedIn and Twitter. We ask that to use the hashtag ABM Engagio with anything you might share. And also we included the handles for today's speakers. If you want to include those, we'll be monitoring that as well. This session is being hosted by Demand Gen Report. If you're not already a subscriber, we encourage you to do so. You can do that at demandgenreport.com and join more than 50,000 of your peers. Also encourage you to check out our social group at Demand Gen Specialists on LinkedIn, and also check out our ABM in Action publication. The presentation will be about 35 minutes. We've got some great content in there. We'll take Q&A at the end of that. Go ahead and type in any questions you have right in the Q&A tab in the On24 dashboard. We'll save the questions till the end. If we don't get to everyone's questions, we'll ask our speaker to follow up with you directly. Also, there'll be a resource guide that you'll get to follow up on and some other things. You can keep an eye on social chat right within there as well. We'll be hearing from Jon Miller. Jon, I've had the good fortune of working with Jon for about 10 years now since we started Demand Gen Report, and from the early days of when he founded Marketo. And he's been one of the thought leaders we turn to frequently around best practices, first for Demand Gen, and then he's really literally helped to write the book on ABM. Jon, as I mentioned, was prior to starting Engagio, was the CEO and co-founder was the co-founder of Marketo prior to being the CEO and co-founder at Engagio. He's a speaker and writer about marketing best practices and also the author of multiple marketing books, including the Clear and Complete Guide that I mentioned and its latest version, as well as the Definitive Guide series that Marketo had published. 2016, Jon was named B2B Marketer of the Year at one of the 10 most influential tech marketers in the world. Jon holds a bachelor's degree in physics from Harvard and has an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business. Jon, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, and really glad to have the opportunity to share some best practices about account-based marketing. As you recently heard, I just published the completely updated version of our core book, The Clear and Complete Guide to Account-Based Marketing. So today's webinar is pulling some of the best insights and best practices from that. Let me start with a story about how I got into account. As you just heard, I was one of the co-founders at Marketo. I was also the first head of marketing there, and where I and my team really built, among other things, the front end of the revenue engine for Marketo that drove a lot of our growth. The marketing that we were doing at Marketo, was kind of traditional demand generation. We would create content and run campaigns, and we didn't care who specifically responded. We just cared, did we get enough responders that we could run it through our system. The analogy is we're kind of like fishing with a net. And it worked really, really well. In fact, we were driving, in the early days, as much as 80% of all the pipeline that our sales team closed. But then things started to change in the lead up to the IPO. We started seeing kind of diminishing returns from, the traditional demand gen tactics. Put another way, you could give me more budget and I could, run another campaign or write another ebook, but that wasn't really going to kind of achieve the pipeline growth that we needed. And there were two other things. One, we were trying to move up market and sell more to the enterprise. And then two, we were also trying to market more to our customers to drive more expansion. What those both had in common is the key people we needed to talk to from that named list of accounts didn't just happen to swim into our net. And so we had to invent new marketing tactics that would proactively find those people at those right companies and reach out to them proactively. It was much more like fishing with a spear than fishing with a net. And, we built those muscles as a company, but I'll tell you the truth, it drove my team crazy to try to make it work with the tools that we had of Marketo and Salesforce. The challenge was, those were lead-based systems, and we didn't have a single view of the account. And the metrics I wanted to know if it was working simply weren't available. And that was ultimately what inspired me to leave and start Engagio. I left in early 2015 and started Engagio on Pi Day, or March 14th, 2015, to build a platform that would be really great at fishing with spears. Well, it turns out that that thing I was trying to do is what people are today calling account-based marketing. And so, we've built this best practice and this expertise around really helping companies practice this new discipline of account-based marketing. Before I get into the best practices, I do want to start by sharing my definition of ABM, which you see on the slide here. And I want to kind of point out a couple of key concepts. The first is that ABM is a go-to-market strategy. It is not a campaign or a tactic. It is a way of thinking about how you run your go-to-market function. Number two, I want to key off of two keywords here: personalized and high-value accounts. In ABM, we're spearfishing. We're reaching out to people who have not come to us. And, we're going to do, the only way to succeed with that and to stand out is if we can be more relevant and more personalized. And the only way that it's going to be worth all that effort is if we're focusing on the big high-value accounts. I'll talk more about that. It's a really important theme. Third, we're talking about something that is marketing and sales. In many ways, account-based marketing is a misnomer, because it's not just a marketing thing. It really is something that spans both departments. And again, we'll hit that theme in this presentation. And last, ABM is about landing and expanding. Traditional demand gen marketing and tools like Marketo are really focused on creating the new business, the new opportunity. But today, so many businesses, so much revenue for so many companies that have recurring revenue models or subscriptions is all about what happens after that initial sale. That, ABM is really perfectly well suited to support both sides of land and expand. So there's plenty of material out there about why you should do account-based marketing. What I want to really focus on, though, is how do we do account-based marketing? That's what this presentation is really all about. It's pulling some of the best practices from the guide. We'll talk about, one, how do you select the right account? And there's a lot of nuance to that. Number two, how do we then engage with those accounts? And then number three, how should we think about measurement in this new world? So I'll hit all those, and then I'll touch on just some tips for getting started, as well as the technology that you might want to think about. So let's dive in. All right, so that fancy transition tells us we're moving to the next section. The first thing I want to talk about is how do you select the accounts? And, I love this picture that we have here because it really illustrates that not all accounts are the same. Even more than that, what's behind that is I think a key insight is to recognize that when it comes to account-based marketing, it's not one style, one size fits all. In fact, there are actually, I found 4 distinct styles of ABM, different ways of doing ABM that are appropriate for different situations. So before we can talk about selecting accounts, we've really got to talk about these different styles. The first style of ABM that I want to talk about is strategic ABM. This is what the ITSMA has long said is the style that has a higher ROI than any other B2B marketing tactic. This is the deep, rich, completely bespoke one-to-one marketing where you're doing deep account research and creating completely customized programs for each account. As an example, think about if you were trying to market to Toyota. Toyota has an annual revenue larger than some companies, some countries. Now, if you were a country manager, you would create a plan for how you're going to market to that country. Well, similarly, if you're going after one of these really big accounts, you should create a plan for specifically how you're going to market to that specific company. This is a very effective tactic, but it's expensive. The median investment companies are making is as high as $50,000 in marketing programs per year per account. And one ABM marketer is usually only serving about 5 strategic accounts at a time. So it works really well, but you just cannot handle that many accounts using this style. The median number of accounts per company is 14, and that's including companies like SAP and Oracle doing ABM on really large accounts. Because strategic is limited to a small number of companies, we've seen other styles of ABM emerge. For example, scale ABM. This is appropriate more for your high 6-figure deals, $500,000, $600,000. And it works for a larger number of accounts. The median number of accounts that companies have for this style is 80 accounts. And what really describes this style is that it's a one-to-few approach that's all about marketing to micro clusters of, say, 20 accounts that are focused on similar business challenges. Instead of doing your account plan for the single company, you're doing your marketing plan for that micro cluster. And then you're going to create really focused programs about marketing to that specific micro cluster within a moderate level of personalization to each of the accounts within that group. It's still a fairly high investment. The median investment is just under $3,000 per account. And so that's why we even have other styles below that. The third style people call programmatic ABM, and this scales to the hundreds of accounts. It's characterized by much broader programs, more technology, and a lighter level of personalization. So each account is still getting something that's customized or personalized to them, but just not at the same level as what we've seen from the other styles. And obviously the program investment of under $1,000 per account is much lower. This is appropriate for your high 5-figure deals, something that might be worth $80,000 a year, for example. And then last, at the bottom, we have what I call targeted demand generation. And what this is really about is where you're using traditional marketing tactics, say, for example, advertising or webinars. You just happen to be promoting and targeting those tactics to a specific list of named accounts. But there's no personalization or customization by account. Because of that, this approach scales easily to the thousands and thousands of accounts, and is therefore probably most appropriate for deals under $50,000 a year. I'm not saying any style is better or worse, or that you should just pick one. In reality, your business probably will span 2 or 3 or maybe even more of these styles. The key is to define what are the styles for your business and what that means for you. And that brings us to the key concept of entitlements. So this is really where I recommend people start their ABM journey. For your business, define Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And then define what does it mean to be a Tier 1 account at your company. What is the contract between marketing and sales? What does marketing say we agree to do every time there's a Tier 1 account? Here's what we're going to do. And similarly, what is the sales commitment? What is sales saying they're going to do when you mutually agree something is a Tier 1 account? This contract between marketing and sales is a key part of getting your marketing and sales alignment in place around ABM. The other thing that defining your entitlements does for you is it lets you really understand your constraints about how many accounts you have. Let me give you an example. I was talking to a company recently where they created a microsite for one of their most important accounts. And it had a really great impact for them. And so they decided they want to, therefore, create microsites for all of their Tier 1 accounts. But then they started to really scope out the work, and they realized that they couldn't, and that they only had the capacity to create 7 microsites. And so that's ultimately told them they're constrained. They can only have 7 Tier 1 accounts because they're constrained. But that logic forced them to therefore be really thoughtful about which are the 7 that are going to get that entitlement. And then, not trying to kind of spread their butter too thin across different accounts, but instead say, well, okay, those 7 will get Tier 1, but then these others are going to get Tier 2, and here's what that means. The biggest mistake I see companies make in this area is effectively having too many accounts that they say are, quote, Tier 1, but as a result, not being able to really put the energy and level of effort and investment that is required to really stand out. One way around that challenge, by the way, is to use an account rotation strategy. What that means is you can have, let's say 40 Tier 1 accounts, because that's what you and sales sort of ultimately think you need. But you agree in any given month or quarter that you're only focusing on the smaller subset, and that they're going to get the extra energy in that particular period. And then the next quarter, that spotlight might move to a different set of accounts. And that's okay, because again, you're getting that benefit of that extra focus that you need to really stand out, that actually matches your level of resources. Okay, so now it's time to actually pick our accounts. We've defined our different styles. We define the entitlements for each tier, and we know our constraints. We know we can have, 2 Tier 1s and 5 Tier 2s and 100 Tier 3s per rep, or whatever it is for your business. Now you got to go pick which of those, which are the accounts that are going to get that level of spotlight. I believe strongly in a process that I call marketing-driven but sales-owned. I think it is essential that sales owns the process of picking the accounts, because otherwise you run the risk of doing great account-based marketing to kind of create engagement at the account, and then sales not caring. The whole idea is that they are picking the accounts, and then you are collectively, kind of deciding you're going to go after them with their support. But marketing can help to drive the process, and they can help to drive and guide the process by bringing data to the table. The spreadsheet you're looking at here is actually, except for the account names being changed, a screenshot of the actual methodology we use here at Engagio. We create a spreadsheet for that rep's territory which has information about the accounts and 2 key scores, a fit score and an engagement score. The fit score comes from a predictive vendor, and that effectively tells us how well this account matches our ideal customer profile. That makes us think that this is going to be relatively easier revenue to get. The engagement score comes from Engagio, and it tells us, is this account warm? Do they already know who we are, or is it going to be more effort to warm that account up? And then we combine the 2 into a total score, which is essentially marketing's guidance to the AE around, hey, we think these are the ones you should probably pick, but at the end of the day, you're going to pick them, and then we're going to agree to go after them. And lastly but not least, I recommend you don't let the list turn over too often. Otherwise, it's just you're treating it as a call-down list and not really a strategic focus alignment list. Okay, so moving on. We've identified our target accounts, and now we're ready to start to really engage with them. You'll notice my icon here looks like a football coach's play with the X's and O's, and that's because we're going to talk a lot about how you orchestrate your whole team to create engagement that you need to happen. So it begins, though, by really going back to the point I made earlier. With account-based marketing, we are reaching out proactively to senior executives at large companies. And by the way, we're not the only ones trying to reach these people, right? Everybody's trying to reach these same people. And they live in a noisy, crowded world like we're looking at here on the slide. And these executives have their barriers up. They are trying to, tune out and block out any unwanted or unuseful sales and marketing messages. But these are the people we need to reach. So one of my important takeaways here is that reaching these hard-to-reach people, there's no shortcuts. The whole idea of ABM is that, we're going to pick the high-value accounts, and then we're going to do the hard work. We're going to actually putting a lot of resource and time and energy into really reaching these hard-to-reach people. You're not going to make it happen just by, running some ads or something like that. You've got to find a way to stand out in this crowded, noisy market. So what does that look like? Well, one of the ways it looks like is, inspired by this data and research from the ITSMA. They found that 75% of executives would actually respond to unsolicited marketing materials if they contain ideas that might be relevant to their business. Where relevant is based upon the fact that it actually teaches them something, it has fresh ideas that advance their business forward, and those ideas are tailored based upon a knowledge and understanding of their industry and their unique business issues. If anybody has read the Challenger Sale book before, this should sound pretty familiar. Because the best sales reps are teaching their prospects something and tailoring it to that unique business and industry. The same thing applies to our account-based marketing. The more we can bring this kind of deep commercial insight, the more likely we are to stand out, and that commercial insight requires personalization, and relevance. Just as a quick sidebar, that 75% of executives, interestingly enough, the lower you go down in the organization, the lower that percentage is. Junior people are not very likely to respond to this challenging commercial insight. But the more senior you are, the more your job depends upon thinking about what you're not thinking about. And that's where, as vendors, we can stand out with ABM. Once we've done the work to figure out what is the challenging commercial insight message that we can, bring to the table, now it's time to actually reach out to the right people at the right accounts. And there's all sorts of tactics and channels that you can use in ABM, whether, it's direct mail or advertising or one-on-one meetings or executive, alignment, you name it. This chart, which I really love, shows data that where we just ask people, hey, what tactics are the most effective? And what you see is, across all of these, humans matter. Executive engagement, one-to-one meetings really stand out, as well as custom collateral and custom thought leadership. It's only at the bottom tier of programmatic we see the more scalable tactics come in, like account-based advertising and direct mail. It is worth pointing out that I think that advertising is a overhyped piece of ABM technology. According to Topo, in fact, only about a third of companies who've done account-based advertising are actually satisfied with the results. And this isn't surprising to me. Ads are ads. We're going back to that noisy world I talked a minute ago. Throwing in more noise with a non-relevant, non-personalized ad is unlikely to connect with a busy decision maker. I don't know about you, but I don't look at ads. I certainly don't click on ads. So if you're thinking about advertising in your ABM, my advice is it's fine. It's an okay thing to add on to an already functioning ABM program, but it's certainly not where I would start. So even more importantly than any, which tactics should I do? Should I do ads or should I do direct mail? I think the key takeaway is that it's really about how do all these different channels, work together to be the most effective. Topo recently published a report where they said that coordinated execution and not the specific tactics used is the key change required to develop and execute an account-based strategy. Where coordination, or what I call orchestration, is really about using multiple channels, going across multiple people at the target account, and perhaps most importantly, really coordinating and orchestrating across your own internal departments, in particular across marketing and sales. And this is a really key takeaway about ABM, is that it does require a change in how marketing and sales typically work together. It's not about passing a baton from marketing to sales. It's much more like a football play, where you've got sales perhaps as the quarterback, you have sales development reps playing positions, you have marketing playing a position, you have your executives playing a position, and frankly, there's multiple people at the target account. And ABM orchestration is all about how does this team work together to move the ball down the field. If that sounds challenging, it's because it is, right? But the value is worth it if you're really trying to reach these big strategic accounts. Or as my friend Peter Herbert from Full Story says, sure, it's easier to work in silos, you just don't make as much money. So we have a sort of a way of thinking about it here at Engagio that I think makes a lot of sense, which is when it comes to sales and marketing alignment, you want to align on the target accounts that you're trying to go after, and you want to align on the entitlements, right? Effectively, you're saying we all agree on what hill we want to climb. Hey, we're trying to climb up that hill. But as a marketer, where you can do a lot is if you think about how do you make it easier to climb that hill? And how do you have that conversation with sales about, our job is to make this easier for you? Which leads me to wanting to talk about ABM stand-ups, or what I call the secret weapon for ABM alignment. This is, I think, the single most powerful thing that I've seen to really help sales and marketing get on the same page and work together more effectively around ABM. What it's about is you take the salesperson, the marketer, ABM marketer, and perhaps the sales development rep. And the three of you meet, say, every 2 weeks to talk about what's going on at the target accounts. My recommendation is don't do this as part of a broader sales meeting because, sales rep 1 doesn't really need to hear you talk to sales rep 2 about their accounts. You want this to be focused just on that rep and their territory. And it should be a two-way information exchange where marketing is sort of sharing with sales key insights about what's going on at the accounts, and then sales is bringing information about what's happening that they know about. We at Engagio, we literally look at a screen where we're able to dive in and talk about each account, and then what we do collectively is we decide what actions are we going to take, based upon the insights that we're looking at. Let me give you an example of that. So here's the account. It was a tier 2 account, so not one of our most strategic ones, but we are able to see that the team, there's a fairly high level of engagement, particularly Spike around a couple of key things. We also knew that they were researching ABM because of our partnership with Bombora. But at the same time, the VP of marketing had not been very responsive to our efforts before. So we decided to run a play to kind of really break through the clutter and reach that VP of marketing. We did a little bit of research, and we found that this VP of marketing is a fan of the Philadelphia Eagles. So what we did is we put together a fairly simple direct mail package that, had kind of a tailgating guide with some Philadelphia Eagles branded merchandise, as well as a customized note that basically said, hey, we'd really like to connect with you and talk about account-based marketing. Now, I do want to point out, this stood out in that crowded noise I talked about before, partly because, direct mail, people don't get many packages that day, and partly because it was cute, right? And it really tied into one of their interests. There's nothing wrong with being cute, by the way. I'm just sort of admitting to the fact that this example doesn't directly align to what I mentioned just a few slides ago around bringing commercial insight to the table. I think in a perfect world, you're doing both. Commercial insight as well as something that's really stands out and perhaps is cute. When Engagio runs hyper-personalized plays like that, believe it or not, we have an 80% meeting rate, which means 4 times out of 5, we get that person to agree to at least meet with us and hear what we have to say. And I think that's a really good example of the power of the hyper-personalized play. Lastly in this section, I just want to give a couple other examples of the kinds of plays that you might run or perhaps even automate. If you look at the fourth one here, let's say there's a target account where we tried to sell and we decided there was a closed lost opportunity. But marketing is noticing that there's some key executives that have started to kind of re-engage with us. Well, that's a great opportunity to alert sales. Or maybe you've got, at the very bottom, a target account that has had, that's been cold and hasn't really done anything in a while. That might be a great time to maybe start doing some advertising. In particular, at Engagio, we find, that we have much better results from LinkedIn ads than we do with broad programmatic ads. You can see some of the examples here, but the key idea of that ABM stand-up is marketing and sales are sitting down, looking at the accounts, looking at the information, and then collectively deciding what are we going to do based on this, and then making that play happen. Okay, third topic is all about measuring engagement in the account-based world. So, if there's, key takeaway from this section is that ABM metrics are different. Obviously, most traditional demand gen metrics are lead-based. How many leads did we generate, and so on. But, at the end of the month, sales doesn't talk about how many leads they closed. They talk about how many accounts they closed. And so, a part of ABM is just changing the metrics marketing uses to be account-based metrics so it's more aligned with sales. Another key difference is that in ABM, your metrics should be more focused on quality as opposed to quantity. This quote from David Ogilvy, I think, really drives that point home well. It's not about counting the people that you reach. It's about reaching the people that count. In ABM, you don't care how many people showed up at your event. You care, did the right people show up at the event? You don't care how many leads you generated. You care, am I creating a deeper relationship with the right people at the right accounts? And that brings us to, I think, the first of the 3 core questions in ABM analytics. That first one is, am I creating and deepening relationships with the right people at the right accounts? Am I creating engagement? That connects into the second question, which is you want to start thinking about account funnels and journeys, and instead of thinking about how leads move through the journey, you're thinking about how accounts move through the journey. And then third, you're thinking about measuring the ROI on your marketing programs. So kind of double-clicking back into that first one around engagement, I think a mistake I see people make is trying to measure engagement using only web data. Web data is a really interesting input into your engagement measurement, but it's not sufficient. And it reminds me of this parable of the blind man touching the elephant. Only using web data is like that guy on the right who's just touching the tail and thinks that he's touching a snake, right? But or a piece of rope. But in reality, there's all these other signals, and it's only when you have the complete account view do you really know what's going on. So that's really about understanding that your engagement is coming from multiple channels. Your content, your email, your meetings, your webinars, and so on. But as I learned at Marketo, the problem is all that data doesn't necessarily connect to the account. And when you can't roll up all that stuff at the account level, you just don't really have the ability to say, this is what's happening at the account. And as a result, all your metrics are limited, plus you have sort of these other problems. So the answer is, I believe, is to really start with your account foundation, a single view of the account that pulls all the data you need about what's going on with the account, and then does something called lead to account matching, which is basically taking all that activity data and rolling it up to the right account. And then the second piece is then to start to score all those activities to really measure engagement. And the key idea behind measuring engagement is that I like using time as a proxy for engagement. Put another way, before somebody spends time with you, they're going to spend money with you. And the better you, and by sort of tracking the time, that's how you're going to sort of measure, are you doing the core idea of deepening relationships? Okay, so then the second concept here that we talked about measuring ABM is about measuring how these accounts are moving through the funnel. The traditional funnel SiriusDecisions created was all about leads, MQLs and SQLs and so on. But back in 2017, they basically said that's outdated, and then we're replacing it with this new thing called the demand unit waterfall, which is really about how buying centers and accounts are moving through those various stages, of the funnel. So, part of ABM is just revamping all those metrics to be account-based. This is what that looks like for Engagio. For Tier 1 accounts, for Tier 2 accounts, for Tier 3 accounts, which accounts are cold, have no engagement? Which ones are aware of us? Which ones are what we call MQAs, or marketing qualified accounts? That's sort of the equivalent of the lead, but an account-based metric. And then how do all of these, for each account, how are they moving from stage to stage? A key performance indicator in any given period, for example, is how many target accounts moved from no engagement to aware. And then that's the kind of stuff we can report to the board. So that's a pretty good summary of kind of some of the kind of key ABM metrics. So let's wrap by talking about, as I said, some tips and techniques for kind of getting started and what technology to use. So, tips for getting started fast. Really 3 key things I want to share. The first is this idea of mapping lead to accounts. This is what I learned from Marketo. If you don't have the ability to tie all that activity to the account level, you don't have that single view of the account, you can't be on the same page with sales. Number 2, just get some simple orchestrated play in place. It's like what I showed you, direct mail within humans following up over email and phone. It's not rocket science, but it starts to really build that muscle of the teams working together to generate pipeline. And then third is implement these ABM stand-ups. It is the single best way I know to get marketing and sales to really align and just kind of move the ABM conversation forward. In terms of technology, just 2 points I want to make. The first is that ABM is not a technology. ABM is a business strategy, and there's actually multiple technologies that support doing ABM well. Second is that, ABM leaders do spend more money on technology than laggards, so certainly technology can help. It's just ABM is not a technology by itself. To help clarify that, I've pulled together this ABM market map. If you just Google ABM market map, you'll find it if you want to look at it in more detail. But what you see is that there's really different categories of ABM technology. There's data and insights to help you find the right accounts and people and understand and insights about them. There's interactions, all the different channels you can use to touch and talk to accounts in a personalized way. And then there's orchestration, which is the key idea of making sure all those channels work in harmony. There's also your foundational technologies like marketing automation and lead to account matching. And then lastly, there's the measurement technologies to help you really know if these accounts are engaging and how are they moving through the journeys. You don't need to buy technology in every category in ABM. In fact, the Topo in their ABM technology report published which are the most important technologies and where do people start. And just to kind of summarize it, pretty interestingly, at the top, obviously there's account data and contact data, because you need to know who the accounts are and who the people are in order to really reach them. But the other two top categories are measurement and lead matching, which, if you go back to the very beginning of the presentation, those are the exact two key challenges that I faced when I was trying to do this at Marketo. So it's no surprise to me that that's where people are really saying the top technologies are. Okay. All right, we made it. Those are some of the highlights of the Clear and Complete Guide to Account-Based Marketing. Feel free to, I think everybody's going to get a copy. We'll send that to you, but you can also get for your friends at engagio.com/guide. And I'll just wrap with, I won't read these all. You can look at them on the slide, but what I call my tweetable takeaways, in case you're too lazy to think about what to tweet yourself. These are some of the kind of the greatest hits of the presentation, and hopefully some of the best practices you'll kind of take away to move forward. So with that, Andrew, I think we are ready to open things up for some Q&A.
Awesome. A lot of great content, John. Thank you for that. Hey, I want to ask you, if the guide, the second version of the guide is represents 2.0, a lot of what you talked about, it feels like measurement and that lead to account matching are key parts. Do you think that's accurate? And where you think some of the new key content is in the guide?
Well, the guide really, literally, I rewrote almost 70% of it versus the first version from 3 years ago, with kind of best practices we've learned throughout that 3-year journey. So everything around the different styles of ABM was new. A bunch of the stuff around which tactics work and orchestrating those tactics is new. Some of the new stuff around stand-ups is new. So I wouldn't point to any of those one pieces. There's a lot of new learnings over the last 3 years.
Okay, great. All right, I want to remind the audience, if you haven't already, go ahead and type in questions that come to mind. We've got some good ones that already come in, so I'll jump into that. John, we had Kevin in the audience said he's trying to get buy-in within his organization for ABM rollout. Anything you could recommend to help get buy-in from his higher-ups?
Yeah, I think, two things I'd hit. The first is, if you're going to do ABM, you should be doing it because it's solving some business challenge that you have, right? Most commonly, what I hear from customers is the challenge is we can't scale pipeline as fast as we need using traditional demand gen tactics, or my pipeline requirements, targets for next year have doubled, but my budget only went up 10%. There's some business challenge, which one way or the other comes down to, we can't get there by just doing more of the same. We need to do something different, right? And if you get people to kind of understand that, doing more of the same isn't going to work, almost by definition, they therefore have to buy into doing something different. And then, number two, you start to kind of really hit it like, well, why is ABM the right thing? Right? And ABM is the right thing because of the benefits. First of all, it is a higher ROI tactic because all your dollars are focused on the accounts that you care about. So there's less waste. So you get a better return on your marketing budget. And then second of all, because you're focusing more time and energy on the key accounts and the most valuable accounts, people report that there's, it results in higher ACVs, higher customer lifetime value, better win rates, faster sales cycles. And the guide has metrics to sort of quantify all that behind it. So that's how I would sort of try to, build the business case.
Okay, great. We had a question from Rachel. She was asking, can I track leads and accounts for ABM at the same time? So are you seeing a balance where people are tracking both?
Sure. And that's a really good question. I think, because this is definitely not either or, right? It's definitely an and, leads and accounts, or people and accounts. Even in ABM, at the end of the day, you're still sending the package to a person, right? You're still talking to a person. The key idea behind ABM is that you're starting with that account lens, and then you're working down to the person to make sure that it's kind of at the right account. So 100% tools like Engagio let you look at both. A key ABM metric, by the way, is coverage. Do you have the right contacts for all the right people at the right account? The other reason why the answer is yes, it's both, is because there's very few organizations that are all in on ABM. For most companies, it's hybrid. Where they're doing some demand generation and some ABM, and the point is kind of both are kind of working together. So it's, yes, leads and accounts.
Okay, great. All right, you've given a lot of great time here. I'm going to take one more question, and then there's some we won't get to, but again, I'll forward those to Jon and ask him to follow up with people directly. Question from Robin. You shared that one of the metrics that come out of it is coverage. She's asking, what are some of the ABM metrics that I should share with the executive team as I get started?
Yeah, so, I think, just to, I'll give you a couple. So first of all, coverage. What's nice about coverage is it's the easiest to track and show short-term impact, right? If you can say, here's the accounts that matter and here's our key personas, well, how many of those did you have data for at the beginning of the period, and how many did you get data for? How many did you have engagement for, and how many did you now have engagement for? It's an easy metric to show some early wins. That's the first one. The second one I would talk about is awareness, and frankly, more broadly, just progression through that account funnel. This is what I showed you from my board deck. How many of our target accounts moved from no awareness to aware? How many of the accounts moved from aware to qualified? How many accounts moved from qualified to opportunity? These are metrics you're probably used to tracking from the lead-based world. Just shift them to an account-based view. And then the third, especially for the most strategic accounts, as I said, is really tracking engagement. Can you show that the accounts that matter are spending more time with you? Because again, obviously you want to create pipeline, you want to create revenue, and you will eventually. But you want to show that you're making progress. Before that happens, and that's where these other metrics like awareness and engagement can really help show a victory on the journey towards pipeline and revenue.
Okay, awesome. This was great content. As always, Jon, appreciate you being so generous. I want to encourage everybody in the audience to definitely check out the new and expanded guide. Again, that will be made available to everyone, and we'll also share a link to go back and review today's session and share it with your peers. So, Jon, thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.